Hey guys, Garrett again. Unfortunately, this is a two-part video once again because my phone is a idiot and shuts the video off if you do the slightest damn thing with the screen, like trying to knock a piece of sand off of it. So I got the bearing off. Like I said, I went ahead and cleaned it up. And now, since it started raining, and it was raining hard a minute ago, there's water all over everything, but I hosed the bearing out real good with brake cleaner. You're never going to get all of the old grease out, and you'll see that when you start to pack it. You'll force the old grease out, and that's fine. Grease is grease. As long as you get the majority of the old stuff out, you're fine. And as you remember, these were not bad. In fact, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have even packed these. But I did promise you guys this video, and you've been waiting on it, so anyway, I've still got to clean the other bearing out. I had to go to town, fucking 60-mile round trip, because I only had one can of brake cleaner left. So I went and got myself another case. One can of brake cleaner is not enough to clean out your bearings and clean all the brake dust and everything off it. So that's where I'm at. I started hosing it down and then went to get another can of brake cleaner and realized, oh shit, I've only got that one. So what you're doing is you're making sure you don't have any debris around the ends of the wheel cylinder, because when you pull the boot back at the bottom to make sure there's no leakage, you don't want any debris getting in there. And at the same time, when you're putting your bearing back on and greasing everything, you don't want any brake dust falling in your new grease. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is obviously friction material, and best to keep that out of your grease and your wheel bearings if you can. So I hose down the entire damn thing. I'll use 2 or 3 cans of brake cleaner on the backing plate itself every time I do this. I mean, other people, you know, use gasoline, kerosene, whatever. You can use whatever you want as long as it cleans. So it really is up to you as far as that goes. But I go through brake cleaner like I drink water. Of course, I don't drink brake cleaner because I'm not a fan of eating Tide Pods either. But I'm sure some of you might be, and that's okay. I won't judge. Just don't let me catch you eating my Tide Pods. I need those for laundry. So really want to make sure you get, see, this can is almost empty. You want to make sure you get all of the brake dust out behind the shoes, on the backing plate, around the shoes. Time for another can. And of course, all the leftover grease in there, I'm going to get that out too. You don't really have to go hog wild when it comes to the bottom end, because obviously nothing's going to fall up, right? But the way I do things, I like to clean it thoroughly because I'm in here, you know, might as well. Because if you don't, well, the next time you have to do this job, it's just going to be that much dirtier. So you might as well get all of it out you can while you can. And while this stuff is, you know, $2-3 a can, this is what it's here for. So don't be afraid to use it liberally. And I mean, hell, I always tell people, if you're going to do this job, you might as well buy a case. because you're going to go through several cans, whether you want to or not, if you want to get it clean. Now, I will tell you this now, worth mentioning. It isn't super important to get all the grease off the spindle on the front. On the back, it is. On the back, you can't have any grease up here on the threads and the keyway at all. Once again, because there's no outer seal on the front spindle, it doesn't matter. You're not trying to plug that keyway with silicone and prevent a gear oil leak or anything, because that's physically impossible up here. So, alright, hose down your shoes too, just for good measure. Ooh, it's got a stuck horn. Oh, I guess it's not a stuck horn. Never mind. Alright, we've got everything sprayed down pretty well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to gently pry our wheel cylinder dust shield up. More crap. More brake clean. This is kind of why I tell people, just buy a case. You know, if you buy 1 or 2 cans, you're going to run out. Alright, so let's dry that off a little bit. To check your wheel cylinders for leakage, and as I mentioned earlier in part 1, you do not take a hub and brake rotor or brake drum off without checking your wheel cylinders while you're in here. You will regret it. Get a little pick under the bottom, peel it back just like that. You don't have to peel it all the way off, just enough to get it away from that metal lip. If you don't have any brake fluid dripping out, you're fine. If the cup inside there is leaking, as soon as you peel that back, you'll have fluid pour out. But you don't check just one side. You have to check both sides. See there? No fluid leakage. That's good. We've checked our wheel cylinder. We're not leaking. Gently pull your shield back down. And that's good to go. Now, from here on, still got to clean this other bearing out, and I've got to pack them both. Now, I'm still figuring out how I'm going to set this damn camera phone up so I can show you how to pack these by hand, because most people don't know how these days. You can use a wheel bearing packing tool if you've got one. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody's going to make fun of you for using the tool. But everybody should know how to pack a wheel bearing by hand, in my opinion. So let me see if I can set this up where I can give you a good visual on how to do this, and I will be back with you in a minute. Alright guys, I think this is going to work. So I grab some grease. I buy it by the 5-gallon bucket. It's a 35-pound bucket of Mystic JT6 number 2 red grease. I buy it by the 5-gallon bucket because going through an entire set of wheel bearings and knuckles on a deuce takes 20 pounds of grease. So it's more cost effective just to buy it by the bucket. This is what you want to start out with. Let me make sure you can see that. A handful of red grease. And take your bearing, hold the taper up towards your knuckles. You want the large gap down. And what you want to do is you want to scrape and roll the grease off of your palm into the bearing minute, you'll see it'll start to push fresh grease. See, there it's coming up already through the top. And you do that until you see nice fresh red grease come out. So you push the little bit of old grease that was left in there out. You get one spot done, you just turn it a little and continue. And once you've done this a few times, it actually goes quite quickly. Yeah, it takes a little bit of technique. Technique is learned. It's not something you can pick up a book and just read about and do it. No. You've actually got to do it with your own hands a couple of times, and you figure out what works for you. See there? And all you do is you do this all the way around the entire bearing. Until you no longer see the tops of the rollers, but you see grease all the way around. Just about like that. Put a little more in on that side. Alright, that bearing is packed. Now what I do is I'll take my finger and get all the stuff out of the middle of it, wipe it back on my palm, and yeah, that little bit of old grease in there, it's not going to hurt anything. Go ahead and roll the bearing through and wipe some on the outside. And this is a nasty job, that's why you see me wearing gloves. It's way easier than trying to clean your hands off every time you need to touch something else. You just peel the gloves off and put a new pair on. Now this is the inner bearing. I'm going to go ahead and stick this on the spindle. And then you're left like this. And what I'll do to keep the waste down, of course, is when I'm done, I'll take and just scrape this shit off on the rim of the bucket, and then take a finger and grab what you just scraped off and sling it down into the bottom of the bucket with the rest of it. I mean, that's probably a quarter pound of grease all together. That otherwise you'd be throwing in the trash or just in a rag. So yeah, this is not going to be enough grease to do the outer bearing, and I usually wait to do this until I've got the hub back on the spindle. As you set this down on a rag, and you got sticky grease, fucking, you pick the bearing up, the rag comes with it, but it's all up to you how you do it and what order. So I'm just doing this to show you. And I was actually able to get this bearing really clean. It's not even pushing out any old grease. But probably used half a can of brake cleaner to do that. And you know, if you've got a parts washer or vat or something like that, you can use that. There's nothing wrong with that. It just, I use my brake cleaner. I don't have a parts washing vat in here, nor do I even have any room to put it in here right now, even though I got a big ass shop. Got too much crap in here. I need a sea can or something for storage. Alright. Smear grease on the outside. Set that there, and now I gotta deal with this crap. Alright, so you can save quite a bit just scraping the shit off on the rim of the bucket. Then do away with this garbage. Anyway, here's what you're looking at. All of this. And I'll go ahead and get my finger greasy anyway. That's about it as far as cleaning up. Now, like I told you, I've got the inner bearing back on the spindle. What I'll do is I'll pack a little more grease in this radius here, all the way around, and then I'll coat the spindle in grease, a pretty thick coat. And you know, there have been times when I've really put a lot of grease on top of this bearing before I put the hub on, but it squeezes too much out. Instead of squeezing old grease out as you go, it squeezes new grease out when you push the hub on. And then as old grease comes out later on, it pushes the new grease that you squeezed out and down, and it ends up all over everything in here. And it ends up getting on the brake shoes, and that's a nightmare to clean. So about what you see there is enough grease on the bearing itself. So let me put some grease on that spindle, and I'll show you that before I stick the hub on, and then I'll put the hub on and show you from there. Alright, I'm gonna do my best to show you this while I'm doing it. I've got 4 fingers full of grease, nice big glob. All I'll do is stick it on there and start working it around. You know, and I'm sure all you guys watching, you're not all going to be newbies to packing hubs. You know, maybe you haven't done it on a deuce and a half, but you've done it on a Ford pickup, Chevy pickup, Dodge, or whatever in the past, a tractor, trailers. You know, the principles are all the same. And some of you will go, oh, well, that's way too much grease, you know, you blow a seal out, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a dust boot. It's not a seal. They call it an inner seal. It doesn't seal shit. And that's why it is easy to squeeze grease out of it if you put too much on the bearing itself. Putting a lot of grease here is not an issue. Remember, you're filling the hub cavity not only by putting grease in the hub cavity, but also on the spindle. The name of the game in this case is not just to grease everything, but to take up as much airspace inside of that hub as you can to keep condensation and water down. So, it's just a little note on that. And you see we're still lacking on the bottom, so I'm going to put a little more down there, and then I'll slide the hub and all on, which is a interesting job by yourself. I'm not even going to attempt to set this camera up and show you that, because I already know I can't do it. It does help to back the brake shoe adjustments off on the top. These two on the back side, I think they're an 11/16. Turn them inboard to let the shoes come in, and that'll help you get the drum and all on, but I'm not going to do that right now because I like to do things the hard way. So hang on a second, I'm going to throw that hub and drum on there. Alright, so I've got it set on there. The way I do this is I'll pick up with my left hand one of the lugs, and with my right hand I'll stick 3 fingers in there inside the drum and lift it on, and it gives you just enough room to slide it onto the beginning of the brake shoes and still get your fingers out without smashing them, unless you've got giant meat hands. I don't. I don't have girly hands, but I guess average size man hands would be a good descriptor. So once you've got it on there like that, you can, well, if the bottom hadn't fallen in, just work it on there. And once again, if you back the brake shoes off, like I said, it just falls on. But my adjustment is good and I didn't want to mess with it. So you've got your hub and drum back on. Now take your outer bearing, and as I was complaining about earlier, it sticks to the rag. You want to set your outer bearing on, push it in as much as you can, and then, oh man, this one hand bullshit. You can push up with one hand to level the drum and hub out, and then push the bearing in more. Or you can get it to this point where you've got some threads and you can just run the inner nut on and pull it up that way. I like to seat things before I put the nut on. It's just preference. It doesn't really matter unless you over torque it. Give me a second, because I got to get all that water and sand and crap that blew in when it was raining off of those lock nuts and lock tabs, so hang on. Alright. Got the inner nut cleaned off and put it on there a couple of threads. So we're gonna do it this way this time. I'm gonna run the nut up by hand, and it should, yep, starting to pull the bearing end of the hub. Now you go as far as you can this way, so you can't spin it by hand anymore, and then you put your bar on it, and that's it. So make sure you don't get any sand on the socket. I really need to hire a helper or something. Alright. The torque spec on this is 50 foot-pounds, so you don't really need to tighten it a shitload. What I usually do is I'll go hear that piece of sand in that drum. I'll go until the drum and all gets noticeably more difficult to turn. And it is important that you turn it as you tighten it to help the bearing seat properly. A lot of people don't do that. They'll just tighten them up, then back it off a little bit, then go on their way. But you need to spin the bearing as you're tightening it. Otherwise, you're not going to get it seated properly. Alright, there. it got more difficult to turn. So these bearings are in good shape. New bearings, you would generally back off a half a turn, maybe a quarter turn, depending on how it feels, how stiff it is. I usually do 1/8 to a quarter turn and then feel it. It's like I've tried to say before, a lot of this is just experience. You can go by the numbers in the TM and all if you want to, and you'll get it right most of the time. But experience means I don't have to open a damn book every time I'm doing something. So we're going to come up. I think I'm going to do a quarter turn. Yep. Nice. Good thing I don't need that socket again right now. I will in 5 minutes. You saw as I was loosening it, right when I got to a quarter turn loose, the hub started spinning on its own. That's awesome. So now, yes. That's perfect. Your final test will be when you got everything back together and you put the tire and wheel on and you spin it. It should spin for a good while on its own. And when it comes to a stop, it'll spin back the opposite direction until the heaviest part of the tire gets to the ground. That's how you know your wheel bearings aren't set too tight. Too tight is really bad. You will burn your wheel bearing off and you will lose a wheel. A little too loose is fine. It won't run hot, but in the end, you know, if you've got this truck for 10, 15, 20 years, a little bit too loose preload will end up wearing the bearings faster. So loose is better than tight in any case. If you don't have a torque wrench and you're going by feel, looser is safer. Completely unlike sex, where looser is not better or safer. Anyway, now I've got to put my lock tab on, which is right here and stuck to everything and still covered in shit because I have terrible pre-planning today. All right, so you want to make sure that your lock ring is still straight, it's not bent. You're going to look at your tabs, look closely at them, see that far left one is no longer usable. The third one to the right, usable. The one to the right of the locating tab looks like it's cracked, no longer usable. That one, I wouldn't use that. So you've got 3 tabs that are still usable. This one, and this one. These are good for 2 or 3 services. Once you see they're starting to crack, you cannot use those tabs any longer. So if you put it on, you match up your keyway, slide it on. The 2 bottom tabs should come to rest on a nut, on the inner nut, where it's not kicked out. If it's kicked out, if you can't get it to slide on and flush up to the inner nut, then you've got to make a slight adjustment, either tighter or looser on the inner nut. Because the lock tab is only going to go on one orientation, you know, because of that tab. So if it's not sliding all the way up to the nut, then the only thing you can do to change that is to adjust the inner nut more. And it shouldn't take much. So once you've got that on, take your nice, clean, or not so clean in this case, inner nut. Sorry about that. I have to set the phone down on my leg for a second. Like I said, piss poor planning today, but just another day. So, what I told you in part 1, the flange, that cast high spot, or not cast, but the high spot from the stamping, goes all the way around the nut. That goes in. Same thing with the inner nut. Thread it on carefully by hand. If you cross thread it, you're in for a world of hurt. And they will get where they're a little sticky on the threads and don't want to thread on fully by finger, but put the socket on there and they'll go. Just need a little more leverage. Well, I say that, there's too much grease on this damn socket because I dropped it in my bucket. Oh my God. And that's one thing I can say about this Napa socket, is it has no slots or anything for the retaining pin on any bar that you use. So it will not stay on. Terrible camera work right now. I'm sorry. I'm really doing the best I can. Okay. I'm going to set this down for a second and clean up the giant mess that I just made all over my shit. Hang on. Alright, I came up with a little phone holding device here that's going to help me a lot, I think. This is a phone sitting on top of a 5-gallon bucket of grease stuck in a Irwin quick grip clamp. So, hooray, 2 hands. You want to tighten this up a bit at a time. An eighth of a turn at a time. When you get up to the lock tab, you'll see it contacting. It just contacted it right there. So much shit. I want to continue on, and let's see if